Introducing the next generation from Nintendo. New Super Mario World. Created especially for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It's Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power. Superpower.
Yo, listen up.
We will not live in a two-dimensional world.
We won't go in one direction
or seek what we can say.
We will be in control of something.
We will change the system.
Mario is back!
Video games were my first love in this life, and I know many share this sentiment. But could you imagine a world without them? A world where people don't spend hours playing video games like Call of Duty or Fortnite. It's pretty hard to imagine, right? But in the early 1980s, that world almost became a reality. A floor of bad video games and a lack of consumer interest caused the video game industry to crash. Companies went bankrupt and people thought that video games were just a passing fad that was over. But then, a hero emerged from the ashes of the crash. A company called Nintendo released a new video game system that would change the course of video game history forever. After the initial popularity of video games in the late 1970s and early 1980s, where arcades were very popular, video games were now dying. Imagine going to a candy store where most of the candy is stale or bad. Would you want to go back to that store? Probably not. That's what happened with video games. Too many bad games were made, causing people to lose interest. These games were poorly made, had no innovation, and offered little to no entertainment value. Consumers lost interest in video games, leading to a steep decline in sales and revenue. At the same time, the home video game console market was overcrowded with too many systems, all offering similar and often subpar gaming experiences. This made it difficult for consumers to know which system to buy, and they often chose to not buy any at all. This eventually led to the video game industry to crash in 1983, which led to many companies going bankrupt. One big name that it bankrupted was Atari. Atari dominated through the 70s and into the early 80s. Consumer confidence dropped in Atari and video games in general. By 1984-85, Atari was broken up and sold off. Video games were now the kiss of death, and companies like Mattel and Hasbro lost millions in investments in video game technology. However, Nintendo was able to turn things around with the release of the NES, also known as the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo is a company that makes video games and game consoles, and they were founded way back in 1889. But it wasn't until the 1980s that they really became a household name. At that time, video games were mostly played in arcades or on home computers. In 1985, they released the NES. They designed the NES to look like a VCR. At that time, VCRs were very popular, and many households had them in their living rooms. And they wanted the NES to blend in with other home entertainment devices, so they made it look like a VCR player to make it more appealing to customers. They also released the NES with the Rob Toy accessory. The Rob Toy was a small robot-like device that could be controlled by the NES console. It had two arms that could move up and down, open and close, and it came with two gyroscopic spinning tops that it could manipulate. The idea was that players could use the NES to control Rob and play games that required Rob's assistance. The release of the Rob Toy was part of a strategy by Nintendo to introduce the NES to the US market. They hoped that by marketing the NES as a toy, they could convince the retailers to carry it in their stores. And it helped the NES to differentiate itself from other video game consoles on the market. It made it more appealing to parents who were looking for a toy that could provide both entertainment and educational value. At this time, video games were still seen as a niche hobby, and some people even thought that video games were a waste of time or actively harmful to children. By making the NES look like a VCR while releasing it with the Rob Toy and giving it the name Entertainment System, Nintendo was able to make video games seem more like a mainstream form of entertainment. They also wanted to appeal to a wider audience than just hardcore gamers, so the NES had to be easy to use and understand. They made the NES feel more accessible and intuitive for people who might not have been familiar with video game consoles. By doing this, they hoped to attract families and casual gamers who might not have been interested in a more gamer-centric design. The design lured the people in, but the charm and the love they put into the games made them stick around. And that's one of the things that really separated Nintendo from other companies, the games. They had and still have this guy called Shigeru Miyamoto, who was and still is a genius at making video games. He created some of the most popular games of all time, like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. The games were challenging, but they were also really fun. People loved them and they became huge hits. People still play them on the NES to this day, which says a lot about the game design. His games were different from other games because they were fun and easy to play. He focused on creating games that people of all ages could enjoy. But what made Nintendo as a company special is that they had a unique way of doing business. They didn't want to flood the market with cheap, low quality games. Instead, they focused on making high quality games that people would really enjoy. And they made sure that every game released was top notch. They also had strict rules about who can make games for their consoles. They wanted to make sure that only the best game developers were making games for their system. Nintendo had their seal of quality, which ensured that anything released for the NES met their standards. All of these things helped make Nintendo and its games incredibly popular. Video games are important to so many people, including me. It's a way to immerse yourself in stories and disappear in the vast worlds on the screen. It's also a way to connect with like-minded individuals. The video game crash of 1983 almost killed the video game industry, but Nintendo and Miyamoto saved it with the NES and great games. Thanks to their innovation and creativity, we can still enjoy playing video games today. Without them, many of your favorite ways to pass time probably wouldn't be here today. Their impact on the industry is still felt today, with Nintendo still releasing successful consoles and games, and Miyamoto still creating beloved video game characters and franchises. Video games are now a major industry, with billions of dollars in revenue each year. What was your first video game you played growing up? And what's your favorite video game of all time? For many people they're the same, but not for me. My first game I ever played was Pokemon Stadium, but my favorite will always be Ocarina of Time. Before we end the video, did you know that Miyamoto was inspired to create Zelda by his childhood experiences exploring the countryside near his home in Japan? He wanted to capture that sense of exploration and discovery in a video game, and to create a world that players would want to get lost in. And with the 27 mainline series Zelda game coming out in May, and it being one of the most hyped games of all time, I'd say he definitely captured his vision. Thank you for watching. Stay safe.